Welcome, everybody. Thank you for attending the Pharma MCM. My name is James Harper. I'm the founder of 28B, and along with Christine, who will be talking today, we set up the Pharma MCM, which stands for Multi-Channel Marketing Meetup in 2018. And we did it after we realized that there weren't really very many informal, agenda-free, non-promotional, regular events where you could learn, share best practice, and importantly, network. So that's why we set it up, and we run these every 6 to 8 weeks. There isn't a really strict schedule, but we try to stick to one, but remembering we all do this as on top of our day jobs and do it voluntarily, and there's no fee. We don't do a bad job. In fact, we've got 878 members as of this morning as part of the community. We've run 19, this is the 19th event, so we've run 18 events, so we've had I don't quite know how many bums on seats over the years. Things have changed with COVID and us going online, and I'm looking forward to getting back to in-person events later this year, once we can sort venues, etc. So it is the point of this is to share best practice, to discuss and collaborate. So please do join in and ask questions. If I can ask you to use the Q&A section for that rather than chat, and that means that Marlies, who's administrating this, can check them. And talking to Q&A, I'm very fortunate today, as this has been put together by Christine and the team at Salamandra, so I get to sit back and listen. I will rejoin for the Q&A session at the end if I can add anything. But really, on that note, I'm going to hand over to Christine, who will take us forward for today's meeting.
Great stuff. Thanks so much, James. That's brilliant. So yeah, so today's theme is create impactful content, evade digital noise with behavioural science and NLP. And the topic really that we wanted to cover was that the last 6 months, we've seen an 80% increase in digital content with Veeva, yet there hasn't been an increase in the amount of engagement or sales within brands. So obviously Pharma's becoming more effective in creating content, and now it's shifting its attention to increasing that impact. And we're really lucky because in this session, we've got 2 specialists. One is a behavioural scientist and the other one is an NLP expert. And they're going to provide us with some practical advice on how to make your content more effective. And then there'll be a piece at the end about how animation can help as well from me. But kicking us off today, we've got George Cunningham, who is going to be talking about the 5 NLP principles to boost content performance. And he is a communication and NLP trainer. He helps business leaders inspire their teams to achieve more, and he offers training, coaching, and support. And he said that if we give him 10 minutes, he'll teach us 5 core principles of NLP and how you can apply that to your marketing straight away. So can I hand over to you, George?
Of course you can. And give me a full day and we can do an awful lot more as well. So let me just share my screen with all the bits and bobs on. There we go. That's the one. So thank you. And whilst NLP can be used in a myriad of ways to enhance marketing and business communications, as said before, we've just picked out 5 simple examples that will spark a bit of creativity, a bit of thought, and an eagerness to learn more. And some of you will probably be familiar with the term NLP, maybe some of you might not. NLP, or Neuro-Linguistic Programming, to give it its full title, is often known as the subjective study of excellence. It was created in the early 70s by Dr. Richard Bandler and Professor John Grinder. And it's been used to improve communication in business, sales, and marketing, amongst many other applications. It uses knowledge and understanding of how information is processed subconsciously to enhance engagement, build rapport, create powerfully persuasive language, and utilize unconscious processes to really deliver results. What we've done is we've created a logical and structured framework that can be easily applied to all forms of marketing, whether it be billboards, print, video, and radio, leave pieces, product samples, reminders, and access getters, and a way of our clients, assisting our clients throughout the development of the marketing process. So let's kick off with 5 ways to improve your marketing effectiveness. Number 2, bonus tip will really surprise you. Clickbait. We've all been caught by this, I'm sure. On average, we're exposed to between 4,000 and 10,000 marketing messages a day. Which one grabbed your attention, and more importantly, why? And that is the challenge really for the pharmaceutical industry with so many brands, products and services competing for attention. The challenge is how to rise above this digital noise and stand out from the crowd. And really, this is where behavioural science and NLP can really help. Now, there are so many principles. As I say, we're just going to take a whistle-stop tour of 5. These are things like getting attention, building rapport, sensory input enhancement, persuasive language, and a specific NLP technique to provoke emotions, aid memorability, and lead to actions. So let's start with something that you might consider as quite boring, and it is the humble vacuum cleaner. And I think we'd all agree, this Vax advert, it's a bit dull. I don't think many people scrolling through the articles on their favourite news website or flicking through a magazine would be enticed by this particular image. So what can we do? Well, Alex Sale of Sale Appliances in Westcliff-on-Sea, he caught the attention of the BBC, as well as taking this image fungal on the internet a few years ago. You've probably seen it yourself, actually, in social media. And essentially what he's done is he's created a talking point. He's put the Henry cleaners together to create a nativity scene. Could be a little bit better. The image itself could even be better as well. What he's done, of course, is make it stand out from the crowd. So how can pharma companies and agencies achieve this? Well, one way might be to use a very unique and eye-catching image to be associated with the product. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, because what I really want to move on to is about building rapport. So we've gained attention, and again, we're going to expand on that theme. It's important to appeal to our customers, being more customer-centric. Historically, pharma companies and brands have been very product-centric. I cast my mind back to my detail aids of old and remember the challenge of creating a mental picture of the patient for the doctor to see where he would use my product. Sometimes it was easier than others. So here's a little example of a smoking cessation message that simply does not create rapport. Yes, it was probably put together at the start of the pandemic very, very quickly. It could be a lot better though.
We all need to try and protect ourselves and our families right now, but especially if you smoke. Smoking damages the lungs and the immune system, making it harder to fight off infections. It also increases your risks of heart disease, diabetes, COPD, stroke and cancer. And that means if you do get coronavirus, symptoms could be more severe. Your health starts to improve from the moment you stop, so please, don't wait.
For help and support to quit in Greater Manchester, visit youcangm.org.
So did anybody else feel like they were on the naughty step at school? Do keep in mind, though, the words that we used here, that, for example, try and don't wait, amongst others. We're going to come back to this language a little bit later. Contrast this talking head, though, with this film from the Welsh Assembly. Let me just let it go.
If you smoke around children, they smoke too. Every year, thousands of children have to go to hospital because of breathing other people's cigarette smoke.
So the film itself, it was made for the Welsh Assembly. It is targeting parents and carers of young children. The film shows typical home scenes. It's filmed in colour. It's filmed as if it's through our own eyes. The voiceover is in Welsh accent and a child's musical box is playing in the background. All of these are designed to establish a rapport. Anyone in the target audience watching it will be familiar with the setting. It's a home, the child watching the telly, the musical box. Oh, goodness me, how many times have we heard those? The voiceover, the Welsh accent, it is just going to further enhance rapport. It is attention grabbing straight away and very quickly gains rapport. There's a lot going on in this film. I'm going to come back to this later because it really does make us stop and pay attention to it. And there's a few other great NLP techniques they're using. It could be improved, but there are some really great techniques in there. The next thing I'd like to talk about actually is what we call sensory input enhancement. many years ago on Tomorrow's World, they demonstrated a wristwatch that you could use to watch a film. It was way ahead of its time, far too far ahead in reality, and it never took off. Actually, it was hideously expensive to begin with. Could you imagine watching the latest Star Wars, James Bond, or Bridget Jones films on a tiny little screen? There's a reason why we go to the multiplex cinema to see them on the big screen. Now, it's well known that we're drawn to images that are big. The bigger, the better, in fact. And this is why companies are bringing out bigger and bigger TVs. So let's turn our attentions back to the vacuum cleaner. This is from a little while ago, this Miele advert. And it really isn't the most exciting advert. The image of the vacuum cleaner itself is tiny, and it is ruling out at least 50% of the audience. And anybody that knows myself and my wife will know that I'm the one that does the vacuum cleaner, so it just doesn't represent me. It's not building rapport. I could never see myself wearing that skirt. Well, not on a Saturday anyway. And so what can we do to make this a little bit different? Well, Miele did a brilliant job with this advert. And if you could imagine driving along the motorway towards this tunnel, seeing the vacuum cleaner getting bigger and bigger and bigger, it is really quite attention grabbing. It is rapport building. We've all got a vacuum cleaner. And the image gets bigger and bigger as you move towards it. It's going to be quite the talking point, I imagine, as you travel through the tunnel itself. And they've got opportunities at the end of the tunnel also to refresh your memory of the product itself. Now, can we use this in pharma? Well, actually, yes, we did. When I was a rep for Bayer in the early 90s, we used a campaign with Monet-style images to promote Adelaide LA. As reps, we all wondered what the link was until Boxing Day, when on billboards outside the teaching hospitals and large health centres, there appeared an image of Father Christmas sitting and relaxing in a Monet-style image, accompanied by the strapline, "The pressure's off." As big and as bold as you like, and very memorable for the target audience. It was a really great campaign. Next thing I want to talk about actually is about powerfully persuasive language. Let's head back to smoking cessation again, and let's examine the language used here. Many adverts will use the word quit. It's even used in a product's name. However, are many of us a quitter? Quitting would suggest failure. Do we really want our target audience to feel like a failure? Contrast that with, "I put it out for good." These are powerful words. The suggestion is a positive action. They indicate ownership of the action. I put it out for good. There's also a nice ambiguity here about the use of the word for good. Does it mean forever? Yes, undoubtedly. And it can also spark thoughts of the good it will do you by putting it out. Of course, there are even more powerful embedded commands and presuppositions which combine to create very powerful language patterns. For example, when you watch this presentation back, I'm sure you'll notice how each example is built on the previous one. And you'll find yourself wanting to learn more about how you can use NLP to enhance your message. That sentence there is absolutely filled with embedded commands, with presuppositions. The presupposition is that you will watch the presentation back. And the embedded command is that you will notice how each example is built on the previous one. These are things that we can include in our marketing messages. Finally, in terms of these 5 techniques, we've already seen a number of NLP techniques in action. There is what is known as a pattern interrupt in the Henry nativity scene. It's like, what is that? The Welsh Assembly passive smoking film also contains the pattern interrupt, with the child exhaling smoke out of his nostril or her nostrils, where we also saw actually the sensory enhancements increase too. Now, in this short video, which went viral on the internet a few years ago, you begin to see these principles coming together with the addition of a few specific NLP techniques, the swish pattern. More about that later.
So your seat good? Get the mirrors all adjusted so you can see everything okay? Just stay off the freeways, all right? I don't want you going out on those yet. Just leave your phone in your purse. I don't want you texting. Okay?
Daddy, okay.
Okay. There you go. Be careful.
Thanks, Dad.
Call me, but not while you're driving. We knew this day was coming. That's why we bought a Subaru.
So in this swish pattern, we're firstly observers. We see a father interact with somebody, then we see through his eyes as if we are there ourselves, and we become the parent. We're interacting with a little girl. Any parent will relate to this. Even when your daughter's 23 years old, she'll always be my little girl. Then when we get caught up in the emotion of the scene, suddenly the little girl is 17 years old and taking the car out on her own, and we see the parent again. In essence, this swish pattern is designed to help us see ourselves engaging in a particular activity or situation. The activity here is feeling confident that the things most precious to us, our family and our children, will be safe when driving a Subaru. Now, there are many other NLP techniques that can be incorporated into our marketing messages. We simply don't have the time to discuss them today.
So
what does this look like? What do we actually do? In work with Dave Pennington and Markify, we can essentially have a very large toolbox of NLP and behavioural science principles and techniques available to analyse, evaluate your messages, marketing materials and strategic content, and assist in producing actionable recommendations to enhance the reach. And the first of these examples here, the analysis of the content, lets us see this car. It's absolutely tiny, and in this particular advert it remained extremely small on the screen. That particular advert, it was all about the people driving the car, and they might well put you off. Contrast that with the third image there, the one of the Range Rover from the front. In this advert, you never see the face of the person driving. It uses sensory input and enhancement all the way through to make the car more and more appealing. It's a brilliant advert. And it's always getting larger on the screen. The colors intensify, the sound increases appropriately. In the final scene, so the two images on the right, the colors, so in the two images on the right, the car disappears into the scenery. Whereas in the very, very final image, the camera continues to slowly zoom in, making it much more memorable and attractive. So NLP for marketing, remember, gain attention. Very, very simple. What can we do to gain attention? What can we do to increase rapport? It's got to be customer centric. What can we do to actually make the images or the ideas more attractive? It's about sensory input enhancement. The language itself, persuasive language. I put it out. And specific techniques, anybody that's familiar with the Dollar Shave Club will remember how innovative that particular advert was and how successful it was. So plenty of NLP techniques in there. So that's my little bit there. Any questions? Time for questions now. And
shall we do questions at the end? Is that all right, George?
Of course we can.
Yeah, if we can have people put in their questions in the Q&A section, that'd be amazing.
Okay, no problem at all.
And we can tackle those at the end.
Brilliant.
That was incredible. Really some real food for thought there. Thanks very much for sharing that with us, George.
No problem at all. I shall stop sharing the screen, and may the fourth be with you.
Fantastic. And speaking of which, next up we've got Dave Pennington, and his talk is 3 simple steps to apply behavioural science to boost marketing performance. And Dave is a marketing and behavioural science leader. He helps marketing become more effective, and his company Markify is a unique service tool that helps you to plan, evaluate, and track your marketing effectiveness. And he's going to talk to us about customer behaviours and how they're being driven and the influence that can be set by psychological principles. So over to you, Dave.
Hello, everyone. Because it is May the 4th, you'll notice that I have a slight Star Wars theme for the day. So in my presentation, I'll be drawing upon it. And also you'll notice that there's a squirrel character that appears regularly. That is from a behavioral science point of view. Characters outperform messages by about 7.5 times in recall rates. So we tend to use them quite a lot in our own marketing because we apply our own behavioral science to our marketing. So what I'm going to do today is look at how can I help give you star content? How can I apply behavioral science to make what you do more effective with your marketing, and particularly within the pharma environment? And I'm going to look at this in 2 lenses. I'm going to sort of first of all talk about some of the key behavioral science principles that affect content and what makes it effective from a psychological point of view. And then secondly, how do we embed that learning into your content so you can apply it to get that performance boost? So again, I want to try and make it as practical as possible. And I'm going to start off with the very, very basic, which is basically all marketing is trying to create a behavioral change. I'm trying to move a customer from one state to another. I want them to believe and do and feel something differently. And if we're creating a behavioral change, then there's so many behavioral science tools and tips that we can use and apply to our content to make it more effective. And also it's quite useful to understand what is actually not that effective that we still use, especially in pharma. And the first thing I'm going to say is, because this is going to be probably the most controversial thing I'm going to say here, is actually key messages are actually a poor driver for behavioral change. Just because we tell the customer something doesn't mean they care. It doesn't mean it resonates. It doesn't mean it has impact. It doesn't mean that it changes behavior. But in pharma, most of the content we develop is structured around delivering key messages. And we can do some quite impressive things to sort of change that and embed nudges to shift that behavioral change that we want within our customers. And the first moment of truth I want to share with you, and this is actually a definition of content marketing, which is your customers don't care about you, your products or your services. They're only focused on themselves. So the first thing I want to look at within with making content effective is our content has to make the customers want to care about what we do. And there's one principle I want to start off with, which is about the value perception of the customer. And if our content has no value to the customers won't even start engaging with it. They won't do anything differently as a result of it. So what we have to do as marketeers is to look at a few things. We can actually reframe the situation. So we're presenting data. If we reframe that around the customer and really talk about how this data is going to improve the life of that customer's patients, we've reframed what we're presenting and making it significantly more effective in terms of how we communicate. And this in turn builds our trust with our customer that actually makes them more prone to be influenced and make it more effective. And we see this all the time, especially when we present data. So if I just show you this from a framing effect, just by how we present our data can make it significantly more appealing by just framing it slightly differently. And this is where we can look at the psychological toolkits that we can use to take what you're trying to say as a brand and boost the performance. And I'm going to talk about this framing effect one more time, because we've seen a lot of anti-vax discussions at the moment with COVID, but I just wanted to think about the best approach that we need to take. And I'm going to take the example of MMR vaccines. What you have is you often have a vaccinated child because of a parent who is very anti-vax. and they have a very strong, firm belief that this might cause damage to my child. And the typical approach that, and it's the one we do in pharma, is to go, look, we have data. We are more effective. We haven't really addressed the issues of that parent, and often you're going head to head with the customer. You're saying, I'm right, you're wrong, and you create conflict. And that customer has a confirmation bias. They like to confirm the decisions they've already made and their beliefs. And also, their decision is made emotionally, not rationally. So when you take this approach, the best way is to reframe the conversation, to talk about what is your shared goal. Well, actually, it's you want the best care for your patient, for the child. Then you can talk about the relative risks of measles, mumps, and rubella, and then autism. And I've reframed it. And by doing that small reframing, you see vaccination rates significantly increase in communication. But again, there's lots we can learn from that approach. And depending on the context of your communication, reframing is such a powerful tool to actually deliver effective communication. And just to help you understand why we do what we do in terms of our decision making, there's one principle that looks at a system one brain, which is we have our emotional brain, which makes most of our decisions. It's driven by emotional primal parts of our brain, and it's like an autopilot. And we do most of our decisions on autopilot without thinking about it. And this includes prescribing drugs. You have a behavioral pattern. You always prescribe what you've always prescribed. And then you also have a system two brain, which is your rational brain, which if you do any market research, you get the rational response back, but really all the decisions are made with that primal brain. And depending on what you're trying to do as a brand, if you're trying to displace an existing behavioral pattern, then you need to engage the rational brain, but in a certain way, and how you engage it really does change the behavior. And if you're a market leader, you might actually want to embed behavioral patterns and to embed this system one thinking within your customer. And just because things seem rational doesn't always make sense. So when you see these cigarette packets and they seem like a really good idea from a rational brain point of view, they seem very scary and they put people off. But actually, when you put someone through an MRI scanner and look at the brain activity, what you notice is it actually lights up the emotional part of the brain that is actually also linked to cravings. So any smoker that sees that actually has an increased desire to smoke. So just because it seems rational doesn't always mean that we're actually driving the right behaviors. The second principle I just want to quickly look at is attention, because once we've got our principle of focusing it around the customer and reframing it around that, if we don't grab the attention of our customers, we've wasted our content on our effort, because no one's going to start engaging with it. And there's a few principles to why people start engaging with content. So I'm just going to share this one here. So the key thing, I think George mentioned it earlier, is we see between 4,000 and 10,000 marketing messages a day. We're bombarded with information. And if I can just make you think about how many can you remember from last week? How many made you do something physically different? It's probably minimal. And when you look at the data, you see that most marketing, only about 4% of it has a positive reaction. 89% of it is neutral, so it's like wallpaper, and 7% of it even has a negative behavior. So an example of that is if you go into a doctor's surgery and you see a poster on the wall saying, so many hundreds of people miss their appointment, don't miss your appointment, it costs the NHS money. It seems rationally like a really good idea until someone says, who are you targeting? The people not in the surgery. What have you just done? You've advertised to people that are compliant. modeling the behavior, saying that it's okay to miss appointments. And as a result of it, more people miss their appointments. So we have to be careful about when we grab attention and how we do it. I'm just going to show you this. When you look at a page like this, all your attention tends to go on the thing that stands out, as in this case, the red stormtrooper. And that's because from our brain, we have this gestalt psychology approach, which we actually want to look out for things that stand out. Anything that we think we've seen before, we pay less attention and we think we know it. And therefore, we're not even don't need to engage with it because we think we know it. And the way that Pharma is going with content is to almost turn it into a production line of content. This is how we do content. And it starts to become less effective over time. But when brands do things that stand out, and I can think of like Compare the Meerkat. In fact, there's a insurance company in the States that all they did was got a duck to walk on the screen, quack the name of the business, and walk off. And within 6 months, their market share increased to by about 120% because it stood out. So we can apply these principles directly to your marketing, but in slightly different ways. And some key things that we need to consider when we're looking at attention is the average customer makes a decision whether to start to engage with a piece of content within less than 2 seconds. So then they need to see the value of that content within 2 seconds. And if it looks significantly complicated, they won't start engaging. It's just, there's always other content we can engage with. So why even bother with this content? So we can make some immediate impacts in terms of attention, which is affecting the number of people starting to engage with the content. So the next thing I want to look at is, once we've got that attention, can we maintain the focus of attention with your customer and make sure that they want to continue engaging with us? And there's a few components that we need to look at. I'm just going to show you these things, which are quite cool. When you see this, immediately you know something is wrong and you're trying to figure it out. And then eventually you go, oh yeah, she's holding a mirror. And you get this reward mechanism for solving this problem. But we like problem solving in our head. And then we can introduce that and into our content. It actually creates intrigue and maintains interest. And again, similarly to this, I'm not sure if it shows you with it should fit on with all the people. It's this tells a story, and it sort of tells it in a visual way. And we're visual learners. Most of us actually prefer communication in a visual way. We prefer stories. And actually, we can communicate in a much more engaging way, even with Pharma content. And I just want to show you about how we actually consume content, because we don't always read it exactly how you think we do. So if you give someone an advert or a piece of marketing and put eye tracking on them, and like eye tracking glasses, and see how they actually consume a page. I mentioned the power of primal brain before. It kicks in, and we actually can't help but look at faces. We're designed to do it naturally. So it means that our attention goes there. But if we have a headline above that, no one would actually, well, most people wouldn't read that headline. And the other thing you notice is that we actually skim read. We don't actually, well, most people don't actually read word by word. So there's certain things you can do with layouts to boost the engagement rates of your content. And the optimal reading age for the general public now is so an 8 to 10-year-old can read the content, and it's not significantly higher for healthcare professionals. And that's because if it seems too difficult to consume, people think, well, I'll read it later, and they never do. But if I make one change to this image here and change the baby, psychologically what happens is you're focused on eyes, and then you look where eyes are looking, and you can completely transform how someone consumes a page and increase the impact of what you're trying to communicate. So having got and maintained engagement, the one thing I want to look at now is, can we influence the customer? And I've split this into two components, because most brands, they say their focus is, I want them to remember my key messages, which is memory recall. So we've got to understand how the memory works, but also I want to see whether we can influence choice and make the decisions that our customers make more likely to happen. And if you want memory recall, it does help if you understand how your mind works and memory works. So most people, when you ask them, they think memories are like a video recording. They're not. What actually happens is we encode memories into stories. And this is partly why when you say key messages, we need to tell the customer these key messages. We don't bake them into a story. And that's a key challenge that we can overcome in pharma. We can make them relevant to the customer. And when we have a memory, there's normally a trigger which sparks the memory. And we can start to embed these triggers into our content, so they're more likely to remember our content at the right moment. And if I say have a break, you probably think of Kit Kat, because that is a perfect example of a memory trigger embedded into content, into your head. And we could do this in sales material, we can do this in any sort of content, and it makes a big difference. When you have that memory, you also have an emotional reaction, a physical reaction going alongside the thought. So the more emotion we can build into the communication, and the more we can link it to a behavior, the more powerful that memory is going to be. So we can increase memory recall rate quite easily. And when you look at the psychology of retention of information, just presenting information, you get about 10 to 20% recall rate of that information. The more I can tag that back to the individual, make it relevant, make it tangible, make them think of their own patient and patient management with the data I do, I can get a 90% recall rate of my information. So it's the difference between pushing out key message Tourette's or making it incredibly valuable to your customer. And these are the key things that we can do with memory. And then quickly just talk about choice architecture, then I'll just talk about how we can start to embed some of these into our marketing. I'm just going to make you think about an average bit of choice you do. So you're given a wine list, you're trying to make a decision, and you just like in pharma, we're given fair and balanced information, but actually we don't know how we're going to make our decision. You might think, well, I prefer Spanish wine over Australian wine, but we haven't most of the time tried all these wines. So the key reference you look at is, I might pick out a grape I like, but I haven't tried anything else. The year, the younger, I think it's better, but I have no idea. So most people go on price. Most people don't want to be the cheapest one, so they tend to buy the second and third one down on the list. But if you do one thing to this and present the same information, but flip it upside down, people are anchored at higher price, skim down, and they tend to buy 2 to 3 spaces higher. So without any cost increase, I've increased profitability using influence of choice. And the power of this is, it's not what you say to the customer, it's how you say it and how you introduce these behavioral nudges to make it more effective what you're trying to communicate. And if we look at choice architecture one more time and say, right, if you want someone to have the Albarino, and I can apply behavioral nudges in there. So if you put markers there to say, this one has won awards, I've added an authority marker, and it increases the chance of someone buying that product. The biggest predictor of human behavior is social proofing. So they're looking for what other people do. And that comes back to our primal brain, because if someone's eaten some berries and they're still surviving, then it's a pretty good chance that I will survive as well. So it comes down to how our brain works in the past as well. So by saying that's our most popular, more people will buy it. And if you said, because it's won all these awards and it's our most popular and there's only 2 bottles left, I've added in scarcity, more people will buy it. So I've increased and influenced choice. So I'm just going to talk about 2 things, because we want to talk about how do we embed some of the behavioral science into your marketing to make it more effective. The first step with all of this is to really say, what is it we want the customer to believe, do, and feel differently? And where is the opportunities to engage? And if you think about the most influential point of prescribing is the point of prescription, but very few people actually produce content for that moment. And actually we can present information in such a way that can influence choice, like wine list, and is really highly effective and increases sales. But within there as well, we need to understand why would the customer want to do that change? Because that's really what you want to try and communicate. And how can I make that change happen? And what barriers do I need to overcome? And what's the psychology of the customer in different scenarios that would affect that change? So we often do a behavioral mapping exercise. And then we can think about, how do I make that change happen? How can I embed nudges to increase the effectiveness? And then how can I embed that into the content that I'm trying to create, whether it be websites, sales material, any other digital material, and we can make it more effective. So that's one where we embed it into the design of the content. The other thing we can do, and again, we work with George on the embedding and the optimization as well. So we cannot sort of optimize messages, but we can take your content and we can evaluate it against, we use about 120 evidence-based behavioral science criteria. And what that does is, and we can also apply about 80 NLP criteria to look at the effectiveness, especially around messaging as well. And I want to look at, I can get an overall quality score, which actually in the past has directly linked to the performance of the content. And I'm looking at the psychology around attention. Can I grab the customer's attention, as I mentioned before? The psychology around maintaining engagement, and finally, the psychology around impact and driving those behaviors. And what we can do is, when we analyze your content, is give you some strategic recommendations about your channels, different formats that you're doing. And when you're looking at bigger material like sales aid, we look at structure. Then we can make tactical recommendations about how you can improve it, like behavioral nudges and optimization. And we're using this just to really boost the performance of content within businesses. So in essence, just to summarize, is all your marketing is trying to create a behavioral change, moving them to buy more, stop using the customer's products more, and we can do 2 things, because you create that behavioral change with your content. So we can embed it into the design of your content, and we can optimize it to increase the effectiveness of the engagement you're having with your customer. So if you have any questions, I'll happily take them at the end, I think, because Christine's about to talk next.
Yes, if we can do it at the end, that'd be great. Yeah, if that was amazing. It's so much stuff that I keep learning from both of you. It's very cool. So next up, I'm just going to be, it's myself, CEO and founder of Salamander UK. We're an animation studios, and we work in a number of different industries, including pharma. I'm just going to share my screen here in a second. But I'm going to be, there's a bit of overlap in what we've all said actually, but I'm going to be showing how, using animated idents, explainer videos, virtual presentations, all that kind of stuff can really help with getting your emotive brand across and getting that sort of, that human touch, that human feel, and getting that engagement. So I'm just going to share my screen. How's that? Is that working? Can you guys see that? Yeah. Okay, cool. So, oops, actually, I've gone into the, really talking about how emotive video marketing and animation presentations and marketing content can help with pharma, but with any industry really. So we passionately believe at Salamandra that visual content, particularly visual content with motion, is an engaging and productive form of marketing for all sectors, even those that consider themselves, dry or difficult to explain. And really 90% of all information, as I think already mentioned, is transmitted to the brain visually, and we process visuals 60,000 times faster than text. So, and it stays in our long-term memory as well, which is absolutely fantastic. So also knowing that 92% of B2B customers watch videos online shows that the impact that motion marketing has on your target audience. But going back to some of the things that have been spoken to before, so why does emotional content work so well? And it's it's the way we're hardwired. And again, talking about the two systems. So the brain can be thought of as two systems. So system one, which focuses on emotion and is concerned with our immediate satisfaction. And you've got system two, which is more logical and deliberate thinking, if you like. And an emotive video triggers an immediate reaction from the system one and subconsciously affects behaviors in the viewers. So in the context of the multi-channel environment, with so much content already vying for our clicks, it makes sense to aim for the system one with emotional content and to help encourage audiences to take action. And logical content can then be used to reinforce decisions in system two, and this can be especially useful for short-term sales uplift, but we obviously need to lead with emotional content for long-term brand growth. So if we see this in action, I've got a couple of case studies to show you. And this first one is animation on PSA. And it's an animation that brings in an important condition to light using a poignant voiceover and giving us insights into a patient's story, again, back to storytelling, and making us care about the illness, using animation as a vehicle. And the mood is in sad, and you really feel for the patient.
I've been living with psoriatic arthritis for around 30 years now. For years, doctors treated my symptoms, but only after I was referred to a rheumatologist was I finally diagnosed with PSA. All that time wasted. PSA has affected every aspect of my life. My children didn't understand why I didn't get down on the floor and play with them. They were little boys who just wanted to have fun with their daddy. Made me feel like a bad father. It also made things difficult with my wife. She didn't really understand what I was going through. She would say things that were meant to help, but made me feel more upset. Sometimes when things get bad, I need to walk the cane. I try not to because people's attitude towards me changes.
So in the interest of time, because I know that it's sort of pushing on, but that gives you an idea of one style. And I've got case study 2, which talks about sleep apnea, a common condition, and explained using simple, cheerful, positive, and hopeful animated content to illustrate the solution. And these two animations just really show the completely different, totally different approaches that you can have, but are both extremely effective in eliciting their intended emotions to the audience. And this comparison highlights how animation can really shift your mood and change your perception of a product.
This is Mike. Mike has moderate to severe obstructive sleep apnea. After years of struggling with CPAP and constantly being tired, Mike felt hopeless. Then Mike found out about Inspire. Inspire is the only FDA-approved obstructive sleep apnea treatment that treats the root cause of sleep apnea with just the click of a button. Inspire is a small device that keeps your airway open using a gentle pulse. It's implanted in the body with 3 small incisions in a same-day outpatient procedure. After the procedure, Mike works with his doctor to fine-tune his Inspire. Once it's fine-tuned, Mike simply clicks the remote to turn on Inspire and goes down to sleep. While Mike is asleep, Inspire monitors his breathing. Every time he takes a breath, a gentle pulse moves the tongue out of the way and keeps Mike breathing freely. And more importantly, sleeping soundly, the way he used to. This has been a total game changer for Mike.
So sorry to cut it short, but really it's just to show you the key advantages of using animation. It's visual, but the movement is irresistible and it draws the viewers in. It breaks down language barriers and can be created remotely. It's a huge advantage if you want to market internationally, for example. It's editable and easily updated in a more cost-effective way than if you had to do a whole shoot without the whole need for a film crew, for example. You can create breathtaking scenes without the whole Hollywood setup, and no need to fly out to amazing locations, and when these can create at animators' fingertips. And it can make your brand memorable. Studies have shown that viewers retain 95% of a video's message compared to just 10% when reading text. It's extremely shareable on social media and beyond. Younger consumers, especially millennials, choose brands from companies that share their same values. So a study showed that 91% of consumers are willing to reward a brand for authenticity, and pharma brands will come on top if they are transparent in their social media marketing strategies and the content that they produce. Social content such as influencer marketing, partnerships, and with advocacy and cause marketing will be the content that actually matters to consumers and will make the pharma brands relevant to them, and also the decision makers, who are 72% millennials these days. So really the bottom line is authenticity always wins the day. You've got, I think it was mentioned slightly earlier as well, you've got 4 seconds to convert someone when they land on your website before they move on. But if you have an animation video, this increases it to 10 seconds, more than doubling your brand exposure and client stickiness potential, which is pretty incredible. Animation boosts conversion rates, including a video on your landing page can boost your conversion rate by 80%. And having video increases your organic search traffic on a website by 157%. They're all incredible numbers. 64% of people are more likely to complete an action, fill out a contact form, or complete a purchase once they've watched a video. And using animation to explain the benefits of your pharma product or service to the user, they're more likely to watch the entire video than read the same printed content on your website, therefore ensuring your message gets across faster and in an engaging and more memorable way. So not all drugs are created equal, and if you can use medical animation to showcase a superior mechanism of action, for example, and elicit an emotional response, you'll take a big step forwards towards differentiation and memorability, which you need to do in all this online noise at the moment. So no matter how fantastic your content is, context can render the hard sell inappropriate and insensitive, which can affect your target audience's emotions, and these in turn affect the different parts of their brain and their actions. So if we keep in mind these 2 C's, so the content and context, rather than just one, we should be able to deliver pharma marketing strategies that are exactly what the consumer has evolved to want, candid and authentic. So hopefully that gives you some ideas on how animation can help support all the other elements that have been talked to us by Dave and George. And that is me.
I feel like I should jump in to do this section, Christine, so you can take a breath, because I know
Sure.
I appreciate you had to fit everything in a shorter time frame than might have been planned. So thank you for that. And I always, whenever I see your presentation, it makes me realize sometimes how unplayful we can be as an industry, and sometimes when we can be a bit proper, it gets in the way. And it struck me as an interesting opening question on the back of your presentation, but also Dave's, where we can see the squirrel in the background, etc. Your Sal in the background on yours. As an industry, we're not particularly comfortable with the idea of being playful or using caricatures or etc. So I'd be interested in either of your experience in doing that. And it also talks to a question from Krish, which has been answered to a degree by George, which is no, it wasn't that one. It wasn't Krish. It was Krish about compliance and medical. It's all wrapped up in this, right? Every time we see a presentation like this, immediately we all think, can I get that through? So that's in 2 parts for you. First part to Christine and Dave, well, and George, about can we be playful as an industry? Have we seen that successful anywhere in terms of using characters? And then to George, whether you've, particularly around that swish technique, and I think it's an important question from Krish, where it could be seen misleading. So if we start with Christine Dave, what's your view on us being a little bit more playful or comfortable with characters and that side of things?
I think if I can quickly jump in, I think playful can be on so many different levels, and particularly using animation, you can be so many different things, and the tone of voice can be exactly as you want it, not just from the voiceover perspective, but the content that you actually see, whether it's the lighting or the colors or the actual character. It can be cartoony, it can be very photorealistic, it can be abstract. We're doing a thing at the moment with a client where we're using what looks like these beautiful wooden balls, and they sort of moving in all sorts of different ways, popping up, going down, and they just illustrating the thought process of a service. So you don't have to be absolutely accurate if you don't want to be. You don't have to use characters. And if you do use the characters, they can be genderless, culturalist, they can be, it's much more malleable than using film in that perspective. And you don't get distracted by that unconscious bias that we all have one way or the other, whether it's ageist or sexist or whatever. With animation, there's none of that because the brain knows it's not real. So that'll be my take.
I think from my perspective, the key there is we often present data, and data is really used to back up a story, which is, if you use my product, it's going to help your patients, it's going to get them better outcomes, it's going to be safer for your patients, or whatever it is, it needs to wrap it up. We just focus on this bombarding with data, and we don't add the context. We don't add in the value to the customer. We don't show them the contrast before and after. And as a result of that, the content's quite formal and boring. And we can tell them that story, and it's just how we tell it is really critical. And if we frame the storytelling around better patient management, which I'm doing quite a lot with around sales aids and websites, it sort of shifts the focus around helping the customer. And when you look at any trust equations and trust models, the more you talk about yourself and what I want to say, it actually damages trust. And the more you talk about the customer and their needs and helping them and making your product and your data part of the solution for the customer, it has more impact and more trust with the customer. You build your relationship. And how you tell that story, you can use characters, you can use animation, as long as it's compliant. It's just how you tell it. It's just telling the story. And that's where pharma can take significant leaps forward in terms of effectiveness of content.
Thank you. I know I said we talked to you, George, but I just want to extend from that something. You talked really interestingly about how customers, this is sorry to you, Dave, but it reflects on all of them, how we need to think about what the customer wants, right? They don't care about your brand, they don't care about your organization, but we heard from Christine, they can care about your values. But of course, in pharma, we have the customer and the patient. So we're very good at talking about patient centricity. We also talk about customer centricity. So I'm interested in your view on how we make that bridge where the primary benefit is to the patient, but how do we ethically then say, but that also makes an easier life for you, doctor, right? Less appointments, less home visits, or less ward, whatever the selfish, non-altruistic benefit is for our customers. We're quite keen. We might verbalize it, but we certainly don't put it in print. You can get rid of those pain in the ass patients, doctor, by using this, right? But at the end of the day, we know from what we just heard, that's kind of what we're getting at.
It depends on if you work in something like diabetes, like I have. A lot of the GPs don't really like their diabetes patients. And actually, we have a shared goal, which is better patient management. So you can talk about that. We've got something that's going to be a benefit for us, the customer, and the patient. But the key, what you want to do is think of, if I'm communicating with a patient, I should talk about the benefits to the patient. And if I'm communicating something to HCP, I should be talking to them on their agenda. And you can bring in these common themes that actually can create that alignment. Because actually, if you start talking about a patient, but that's not really what's driving that healthcare professional, then you can create this discord, and actually you want to create alignment and reframe it around helping them do their job better by managing their patients more effectively. And you can get significantly more engagement as a result of it.
Thank you. And George, not so I don't forget, and to Chris's point, did you call it switch or swish? The pattern? Swish pattern. I thought it was really interesting challenge from Chris on that because you're flip-flopping a bit on expectation through that messaging, right? You're moving someone between two different things. Chris's, for those that didn't see the Q&A, Chris's question was, have you ever had an experience discussing the swish pattern with medical approvers? I feel there might be a concern that this would seem misleading or off indication, etc. So there's that immediate question is, have you had experience? And secondly, just expanding on that experience of how much engagement have you had with medical compliance about the use of behavioral psychology and NLP and how it leads someone on a journey through content?
I think the key element here actually is to actually clarify it being a swish pattern, not a switch pattern. You know, as a medical rep myself many years ago, we would be talking about switching from ISTIN to Adler LA, for example. That is not what we're talking about here. It's about the unconscious processing of the information. The example I put into the chat question there is to demonstrate that swish pattern, which is at the end of the Welsh Assembly anti-smoking advert or smoking cessation advert, if they had cut to an image of the parent or carer, because everything that you've seen so far in that particular film was all through the parent's eyes, looking at the children, seeing the smoke coming out of the children's nostrils. Contrast that with cut to the parent at the very end, stepping outside, closing the door and taking a cigarette, and a voiceover saying, if you have to have a cigarette, step outside and protect your children. That's the swish pattern, which is where we see ourselves doing something different. Now, in terms of, you know, is it off, what was the term used? Was it off indication? No, because it isn't interfering with the indication at all. So providing everything is within compliance, within the indications, we can use these NLP techniques very effectively. You know, in adverts, for example, we could potentially use the image of well, in fact, I think we did it actually with the Adler LA advert, where Father Christmas was sitting in a Monet style big billboard advert with his feet up and the pressure was off, very much like your doctor would be on Boxing Day, you know, having dealt with all the problems on Christmas Eve. And so, you know, it's the application of it.
Just one thing as well is because when you look at the content, especially if you're dealing with sales reps, there's the material and the interaction. So when you look at the playbooks and the narrative and the questioning, one of the things that George and I do is we can sort of create a playbook that creates the right narrative, the right questioning, the right framework for you to get the best behavioral change as well. Because a lot of the time we produce content especially sales aid, spend a fortune on sales aids that never really get used in the right way at the right time. They're a presentation and they need to be an interaction. So when you look at a wider environment for your content and all the tools you can use, that's when it's really powerful. And we're just trying to create the behavioral change in the customer in the most effective way, using nudges that are their choice. We're helping them choose. That's why I called it choice architecture. And you can sort of set the right framework for it with behavioral science and NLP.
Okay. Christine, anything to add? I'm conscious that the time. I don't know
yes. No, I think that's. I think at the end of the day, one of the things that we sort of harp on about a lot with regards to business animation is that just never forget that we're talking to people, and it's, you know, everybody you're talking to, whether they're business people or not, or their customers, it's, we've all got homes, we've got hobbies, we've got, pets or children or none of the above. But I think when you're communicating with people, obviously you've got to be professional, but just never forget that you're actually talking to a person. That makes all the difference, I think.
Great. Thank you, Christine. We're starting to lose people. So bring it back around just to say thank you so much, Dave, George, and Christine for presenting. And it was a really good set of 3 talks that really complemented each other, really drove home that messaging about thinking about the customer and their needs first. And as you say, Christine, that everyone's human, and we can do that. There's for those that rack, I know that you were asking about a particular slide of Dave's. I think that was for reference. We are recording this. It will be made available on the YouTube channel, which you can just Google Pharma MCM YouTube and it comes up. See all our past talks there. Big shout out to the team at Salamander who do the editing on that in their spare time. Put that up there. It's much appreciated. Next talk is going to be in June, and it's going to be on high impact content and how to break through in terms of consent and access. And we're looking at reprints to e-prints with the team at Tangent 90 and a couple of other speakers we're hoping to bring along. Thank you everyone for attending. As always, thank you for being part of a great community. Thanks to Salamander for organising this, and thanks to Dave, George and Christine for presenting.
Thanks, James, for doing that. And thanks so much, Dave and George, for presenting. That's fantastic. See you again soon. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.